We're now getting started on to photosynthesis. Okay, so again, we're going to kind of do the same idea that we did with this last topic with cell respiration. Hi.
Hey, I got him to come.
No, I just finished art class.
Welcome. So we're going to do the same idea. So we're going to spend these 3 lessons. I will kind of see how it goes. We might actually only need 2 lessons to cover this SL stuff. So we'll be able to be a bit flexible. The HL stuff will again take definitely 4 lessons, probably a 5th lesson as well. So let's see where we go. Yeah. And you'll notice again, kind of like what Richard was asking, like what's different between the SL content and the HL content for this topic. There's really like 2 or 3 key things that are new from that you wouldn't have known already from IGCSE. Like for the most part, background is very similar. 1 or 2 major things that we'll cover sort of slowly so that we're not overloading. Okay, so if we're ready to go, let's get into it here.
New topic photos.
So, all right, here's where we are. So in this week, so you can see I've sort of loaded up today's lesson and tomorrow's lesson a little bit, and we'll see if we need Wednesdays or not. We can kind of play by ear as we're going. But for today, again, you have your PPT that we will use, and then you have the topic and notes sort of document that looks like this. Okay, so you'll notice if you actually read this, these are quite simple. Some of these questions, a lot of them are like just define, state. Like this is just for the equation. Again, it seems like, oh, whatever, I don't have to do it. But at least if you do it, it's here. It's all done. It's in one document, and you've made yourself study notes. So it's a way to 1, revise the lesson, and when you're done, 2, just to have like one place you can go instead of like flipping through a textbook or whatever and like redoing all this stuff again. Okay, so today, basically, I think it's like questions 1 to 6, and then another like I wrote it on iLearn anyway. 1 to 6 and question 9 you should be able to do. These 2 are taken from a different resource. There's some overlap between this one and these ones. So, you know, if you see the same question doubling up, you don't necessarily have to keep doing it over and over, but at least one of the questions from the topics question or do these 2 PDF questions should be good for a summary. Okay, let's begin. Where's the PowerPoint? That's not what I want. Okay. Here we go. All right. So photosynthesis. In IGCSE, we would describe photosynthesis as kind of the reverse, right? The opposite of what's going on with cell respiration. We also listened to some really hilarious and entertaining like music videos and songs about like making photosynthesis fun. The one I usually like to play is the Katy Perry one. If you remember, you can look it up if you want.
What?
Don't remember.
Da, 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 na, 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 na. These 3 actions come to produce
I remember hemoglobin.
sugar.
I don't remember like red blood cell.
Yeah, the hemoglobin.
Oh, the bloodmobile.
There's a tiny.
Oh.
And the rap.
Yeah, the rap was intense.
And the Kingdom,
yeah, King Philip, yeah.
yeah.
Well, maybe
coughed on fat and then he got sick.
Maybe I'll send Katy Perry photosynthesis again today, or later today. In any case, so basically what we would do in ID is just learn the equation, learn what it's for, and like what does the plant use its the products for. And we're going to do the same thing. That's where we're going to start. So we're going to say that essential idea, photosynthesis uses the energy of the sun in order to produce the chemical energy needed for all life. And this is where we can get very philosophical with this, right? And we can say that like nothing, all the energy that gets converted through not nutrient cycles, excuse me, food webs and food chains, all of this would be impossible if not for photosynthesis, right? Because that energy in the form of plants, which then gets converted to the bodies of animals, which then get eaten by other animals, all of that is possible because photosynthesis exists. If there was no photosynthesis, the light, the energy from the sun, right, that's just coming in the form of light, it would just stay as light and it would never become chemical energy, right? So if this process that we're about to describe didn't exist, then there would be no life really as we know it on Earth. So it's really essential to understand that like all of the other things that we're talking about, even like if you want to get as like, you know, like deep and like whoa, as like we wouldn't exist, there would be no humans if there was no photosynthesis, right? It's like a funny like, oh yeah, photosynthesis, yeah, we all know it, but like if there's no food, if there's no organisms, then there is no human life, right? Yes, precisely. Precisely, I agree. So, something to consider. If you take a look at the understandings, you will see that there's like, it's one of those times where they've like used some fancy like IB words to describe some really typical things. I'll say right off the bat, there's like the stuff that's new is, let's get the annotation here. The stuff that is new is, yeah, this stuff, this like wavelength business, okay? So we're gonna do like this part, drawing the action and absorption spectrum. That's gonna happen today.
Oh my God, physics.
What?
Okay, but this, for example, like limiting factors, we've done that before. If you look here, like this, we definitely know. We know that oxygen is produced. We know that energy is needed. And then you know how to design an experiment in general, maybe specifically about photosynthesis, potentially not. This part is an activity, the last one, that we can't do because we are not in the lab, but we can do a virtual version of that. So you can see that quite a few of these are just talking about the equation, what's being made, what's being used up, and you know, limiting factors and things. So what's really new? This stuff about light, some more details about the type of light that's best for photosynthesis, and being able to draw the graph that goes along with that. That's the major part of today's lesson. Okay, so without dragging our feet too much more, let's just get started. Yeah. All right, so define, right? This is the long definition of photosynthesis. If you split up the word, it means to use light to make, right? Synthesis means to make something, photo meaning light. This is a metabolic pathway. It is a, for HLs, it's a metabolic chain, right? It has a start and an end. And we know this equation. If you do not know this equation, I am not sure that you are a human person or that you have paid attention for approximately 3 years of your school life. Because you should know this equation off by heart. Forwards, backwards. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's here? Oh, all right. Now, you're going to see on this slide specifically, you'll see some things in italics. Those are mostly, if I'm not mistaken, for HL students. So terms like light independent and light dependent reactions, that's where we're, HL students, we're going to dive deep into those and kind of break this very much like we did with cell respiration. We're going to break down every part along the way of this process. SLs, you don't necessarily need to know, like for example, you don't need to know about NADPH or like the details about using ATP. This is sort of an HL detail that that is only for them. Okay. HL. It is fun to know though, oh gross, that that the photosynthesis process happens in 2 stages. There's like one part of it that happens when there is light, and there's another part of it that happens when there isn't light. So for SLs, that's about as much as you need to know. You don't need to know much more than that. But it's just like, it's like a 2-step process, meaning photosynthesis is constantly happening. It doesn't like happen when it's light and then it just does nothing in the darkness. Okay, so there's different roles, which HLs will look at much more in depth. Okay, so what parts should we know? We know that if we follow the carbon, right? If we follow the carbon, we know that the carbon from CO2 is going to become a part of glucose, right? This is why they have different colors for this. So the carbon from CO2 is going to get incorporated into the glucose molecule. And the term we use for that is fixed. HLs, we will learn something called carbon fixation. Hi, Joseph, Mr. Liu. Carbon fixation, meaning taking that CO2 and like shoving it to other Cs to make glucose, right? In the shape that we are familiar with. So let's call that like step 1, like point 1, something that takes place in photosynthesis. Another thing that needs to happen is taking water and splitting it apart. Okay, we're going to define that later. So water gets split apart. Okay, you can see that the hydrogen, right? Where does the hydrogen end up? Let's use a different color. Okay, so where does the hydrogen end up? The hydrogen ends up as part of the glucose molecule here. Right? And where does the oxygen from either of these, as it's been taken away, oxygen here, is going to end up some as part of the glucose, some excreted as a quote unquote waste product.
Wait, does it matter which oxygen is used as waste product?
No.
Okay.
No. Can I never make this go there? Oh, there it is. Nice. Okay, so as a summary of the process, or like maybe not even a summary, maybe actually like some detail, but like this tells us what's happening, right? It's a metabolic pathway. Carbon dioxide is somehow they combine together with water and we're making carbohydrate molecules. Starting with glucose, then we'll build other stuff later. A waste that is produced is gas, is the oxygen as a gas. Okay, what do we need to make this all happen? Whoops, sorry. We need light energy. Oh no. Let's just do this. Okay. If we don't have the light energy, none of this is possible. Okay, so light provides the energy, and then the energy from that light is somehow trapped in between all the carbons, right? So we have carbon, 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 even though that's not real. We know that that's not the way that the molecule looks, right? But the light energy is what makes these things attach together, right? The energy is found in the bond holding the glucose together. Oh, Miss Katie's modeling some of her purchases right now. All right, so the light energy becomes these bonds. Any questions before we move away from this equation?
Mayo.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, it's just a little bit of extra kind of depth about what we have, some stuff that we already know, right? Okay, let me clear this off. And imagine I could erase the whiteboard that fast. It'd be so good. Okay, a little bit more now. And I need to be able to see this, so I'm going to move your faces. All right, this term, photolysis. It's the word or the term that we give for, whoopsies, don't do that yet. I really like this highlighter. Okay, photolysis is the splitting of water molecules.
Wait, so
Okay.
Using light.
Correct. So using light, I'm going to move down here. Using light, water is split. So basically, the light is causing the breaking apart of the water. Okay. SLs, you just need to know that what that word means. SLs, we will see really what happens when light breaks water and what happens to the stuff that's produced. So like here you can see that they're showing O2, H+ ions, electrons. SLs, you can ignore all that. You just need to know the term. Okay, so the term is photolysis. When that energy is consumed, like we said in the previous slide, the light energy is converted to the chemical energy. Okay, and this is just sort of the very, very, very basic detail for SL level of what the HLs are going to cover in future lessons. So if we go with this, these are the two parts to how photosynthesis really works. Some of this stuff that happens in when there's light available, and some stuff that happens when light is not available. If you have some interest, again, if you're SL and you're just like curious, you can see that like the actual like making of glucose happens more when there's no light. What you do with the light is like building up of material. So it's kind of like gather what you need while there's light available, and then when there's no light, you actually make glucose. It's the simplified way of thinking about how this works. Make the materials, the raw materials needed, use them to build glucose. Then the sun comes back up, gather and make. When the sun goes down, build. Okay. Now, what are we doing with all this glucose? We are making polysaccharides, right? What does poly mean? What is it if you add poly to a word? Multiple, many, right? So many, and saccharide means?
Many saccharide.
But what is saccharide? Sugars, right? Or carbohydrates, sure. But sugars is more specific. So many sugars attached together. The examples that a plant will make are starch and cellulose, right? What is the equivalent of starch in a human or an animal? How do we store our excess saccharides?
Glucose.
Can we store glucose? as glucose?
Glycogen.
Glycogen, right? We store extra glucose in the form of glycogen. So the way a plant does it is it makes starch. So when a plant has too much glucose, it will store it as starch. And the truth is, when we eat vegetables, when we eat grains, we are stealing that plant reserved energy and making it a part of our cells. The other one, cellulose, is more for what kinds of use? What does the plant use cellulose for?
Cell wall.
Cell wall. Yeah, so structural, right? So building cell walls, building, which then will build stems and other structural components. But both of them are examples of polysaccharides. All right, so yes, take glucose, shove them together, boom, 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 make long chains. If you go back to 2.3, right, you would see the differences, like which type of glucose, right? Because cellulose is very long chain with no, not a lot of twisting, right? So it's like up, down, like flipping back and forth, so it evens out. Whereas starch is a little bit different. Starch has like two kinds, amylose, amylopectin, right? Some is branched, some is not as branched. That's a bit of review from the last previous lesson, 2.3. Okay. And the last question before we get into some wavelength stuff is, whoops. Oh, there's a question I can't see because of this. What is the, okay, it's already doing it for you. That should have been a review, but to put these all together, remember that it's a condensation reaction, right? Condensation reaction, we produce H2O as a byproduct. This bond is called a glycosidic bond, right? Bonds between sugars are glycosidic bonds. So this is like after you've made glucose, when you want to start making starch and cellulose, you need condensation reactions to take place. And just kind of incorporating old knowledge. Okay. So far, not a whole lot of new stuff, right? We haven't really learned anything super new except maybe the word photolysis. Aside from that, it's stuff that we've known already. The next part is, I think, as Richard just mentioned, is also stuff you should know if you did a little bit of physics, okay, in your life ever. Or even if like from primary school, if you've done like color, like light, like the spectrum of light, you may have come across this. Now, this slide is not here to say that you need to know how the electromagnetic spectrum works, okay? As usual, let me tell you what are the specific parts that we're interested in. What we're interested in here is first, only the visible light spectrum, meaning the type of light that we as humans can see with our eyes, okay? And that falls right in here. You can see the part that's kind of blown up, okay? Starting here, somewhere between UV light and infrared light. And what we need to know as an SL level is, first of all, the range, and this is hard because there's a lot of colors here, and it's not possible for me to use colors, but I will try, all right? Is the range that the visible light spectrum goes from. So what this tells us is that humans can see light that has a wavelength between just below 400 nanometers and just a bit over 700 into like 780 nanometers. What do we mean by nanometers? Nanometers is measuring the wavelength, okay? It's measuring how long is one wave, like between here and here, okay? And as you go from low nanometers to high nanometers, we're seeing something like this, right? We're seeing like higher frequency, higher amounts of waves in a shorter span of, in a shorter distance versus long stretched out wavelengths. That's what this whole spectrum means. If we look specifically at only the visible light, we can say the same thing. We can say that, for example, purple light has really, relatively shorter wavelengths, right? Whereas red will have longer wavelengths like this, okay? Longer and wider. So the visible light spectrum stretches from short wavelengths like purple and blue through medium wavelengths like green, yellow, orange to large or longer wavelengths like red light. We can see all of this. And when you see colorless light, you're seeing a combination of all of these colors mixed together. How does
Aren't
this all
we
fit
doing photosynthesis?
Correct. I was just about to say. So how does this all fit into photosynthesis? Well, photosynthesis is a plant using light and converting the energy from light into glucose. So why is this relevant? We want to know what type of light can a plant use best or most efficiently in order to make those organic molecules, in order to make that glucose, okay? So the first thing we see is, if we read this part here, let me get rid of this. Hold on, I thought there was a part where, okay, sorry. It is here, okay, here. So this part here is showing us why a plant can only use the visible spectrum, okay? There's a lot of energy in something like UV light, okay? But it's very harmful to the organism. So UV light, you know, that's why you don't go out in the sun like without sunscreen on or without covering up, because it can damage the DNA in your skin cells. Well, the same thing would happen to a plant if you shone UV light on it, right? And then low frequency, if you get too far this way into like radio waves and whatever, then that just doesn't have enough energy in it, okay? So anything to the left of the visible light is too high frequency, anything to the right is just too weak. So what we have left is what's visible to us, the light that we can actually see. Okay, so then within that range, within the range of visible light, you can break down even more what parts of visible light are better or worse for plants. And that will give us these graphs that you see here, and we're going to build them together, showing what types of light are best for a plant to be able to photosynthesize. That was quite a bit. So let me pause for a second and let you, if you have something to clarify, please ask.
Wait, so does that mean the plant will only take red and purple?
Whoa, slow down. We're gonna get to that.
Okay.
This is just the intro to that exact point, yes. That's where we're getting to. Okay, then let's go. So first thing, this slide is intentionally meant to look like it comes from your second grade science lesson, okay? The reason being, why is the sky blue? Why are plants green?
Why is Miss Katie in the background?
Why is your clock still not fixed?
It's fixed. Wait. Oh no. Yeah, it is.
Oh.
Hey man, I put a new battery in, okay? Because you guys keep fun of me.
And
I saw the minute hand in the other way. Anyway, congrats.
It's just you just always, no credit. Anyway, Yes, okay. So colors that we see, the reason we see something as a color is because that's the color that is being reflected, right? Meaning that the rest of the light that is shining on that color is being absorbed by that pigment, okay, by that object's color. So for this topic, a leaf that is green is seen as green because all the other wavelengths of light that are hitting it are being absorbed. And only the green light is being reflected back. So that's what comes into our eyeballs. And then that's what we see, okay?
I never knew that. What the hell?
Yeah. To be honest,
He
if
taught
I'm
us
being very,
that.
yeah, I mean, I think you did know that, but it's kind of, yeah. I still remember like trying, like my teacher teaching us this in like 8th grade. And for some reason I was getting very angry about how this all works.
Everything is absorbed here except for red. Wow.
Unless a physics person wants to jump in and say something different, that is the understanding that I believe we need. Okay, so that's the first thing. We know then, oh my.
What is happening?
I'll explain later. There's equipment that has arrived.
Oh, the
Ooh.
cradle?
No, weirder than that. Anyway, moving on. Let's leave that for therapy session. So we're going to look at, because we know that green is reflected. So if green is the one that's reflected, what are the other colors doing? Meaning, is there a difference between like purple, blue, yellow, red, orange in terms of how a plant would use that energy and how well it can produce ATP from it? Sorry, not produce ATP, but produce glucose from it, okay? These animations might be a bit more than SL level, but could be good just to see the process. But I would probably say that these are more of an HL level that you could just try and mess around with, or potentially could be something you would use in an IA situation if you wanted to do plants in the future, and have like some way of comparing what you did in the lab with like a simulation. There's a way that you can mash these two sets of data together. For now, let's just move ahead. I was going to draw this on the iPad, but maybe I don't have to. Maybe I can just do it where just on the screen here. Okay, so there are two graphs that we are going to now look at, okay? We're going to see something called an action spectrum and an absorption spectrum. So these are the two brand new things that we're going to learn today, okay? So these two terms, the action spectrum, let's draw, okay, orange, okay, action spectrum is showing us, action Bronson, is showing us how well different colors of light, different wavelengths of light can produce carbohydrates. If you summarize it, basically, how good are the different wavelengths at doing photosynthesis, okay? So you can see this by looking at the y-axis here and seeing that it is measured in terms of the percentage of max photosynthesis. So let's say like the top of this graph is like if photosynthesis was 100% efficient, meaning every single photon of light was converted into organic matter. Now that's nearly impossible to do. However, we are able to measure by using different kinds of light, like the efficiency of each one of those types of light, and then string them together in a line graph because we know that the wavelength is a continuum, right? It's going from low, like 350, 360, whatever, to almost 800, right? 780 is usually what we accept. So we know that from violet all the way over to red, we have this continuum of the visible light, right? So we go from small to getting longer and longer. Of course, that's absurd the way that I drew it, but you get the idea. And what we can see is that violet and blue colored light gives us, pretty high efficiency of photosynthesis, right? Somewhere in like around 80% of the maximum, right? And red gives us almost the same, not just a slightly lower, maybe around 75% of the maximum photosynthetic ability. Whereas green is trash, right? Green is trash. It gives us almost no photosynthesis. So
What?
if you're, sorry, go
Any
ahead.
green is trash?
Good question. We are looking, this example would be for a green plant or green leaf, right? Green leaf, where the pigment that's making it green is chlorophyll. So there is a bit of an assumption being made, right? We're assuming that the plant we're talking about in this moment is a green plant, green leaf, and that the chemical that's absorbing its light is chlorophyll. Now, what we'll see in next subsequent slides is there are many different types of pigment, but the most common one, if we're looking at a green plant, is chlorophyll.
Mr. Nilan,
Yes.
but how are we gonna get the percentage if we can't read it? Like, how do we get the value for max rate of photosynthesis?
I believe it's if you do colorless light or white light, right? And you say that when you have white light, which includes everything, then that's 100. That means that when you split it up by like the individual colored lights, right? So then you do like a blue light and a green light and a red light, you'll never reach as much as you would if you just use white, because white gets you every possible amount of energy.
But
So I
then,
think it's a percentage of white light.
but then in this case, if the white light can give the max rate of photosynthesis, why the plants still like try to remove the green light if just absorbing all the light will give the max photosynthesis rate?
I don't think that I don't think it's choosing to do that. I think that's just what's happening. Like the structure of chlorophyll is such that it is not able to absorb that wavelength of light, because there are other pigments that can absorb.
The question is like if absorbing all the light will give the maximum rate of photosynthesis, why is pigment exists to remove some of the light, which will lower the rate of photosynthesis?
I'm not sure if there is an answer to that. I see what you're saying, but like, yeah, I'm not really, I don't know the answer to that question. Because evolution hasn't gotten there yet, I'm not sure. Because it has to have some kind of color. Like, unless you had a clear plant, no wait, yeah. And you had if the pigment were white, no, that still doesn't work. That would be all reflected. If the plant were black, yeah, I think that's like a hypothesizing idea, but I see what you're saying. I just think it's just not the way it is in plants at the current state of our planet. This is what we've got.
I mean, still
Maybe Richard can go grow some black plant and see what happens.
Maybe. Need a black pigment. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Just to make sure every light reflected is white and every light absorbed is black. Right?
Right. If you have something if something looks white, that means that it's reflecting all of the light, the whole spectrum. if something looks black, it means it's absorbing all of the visible light and not reflecting any. That's physics stuff. Okay, so again, remember that this is only one of the two graphs. This is the action spectrum showing us the ability for different wavelengths to do photosynthesis. We are going to pair this graph with this second graph. Let me clear this stuff, okay, which is called the absorption spectrum. The absorption spectrum is a graph that shows how much of the different wavelengths are absorbed by chlorophyll. Okay, then that's where this comes into play. We're specifically talking about chlorophyll, the pigment. So what do we notice? Okay, and this is like a really complicated way of saying something that you probably, like Rebecca basically figured out on that first slide, is we notice that in the colorful line, which is showing our absorption spectrum, we can see that violet and blue have very high absorbance. So we can see that violet and blue, almost 75% is absorbed and very little is reflected. Green is not absorbed very well at all, and red is pretty well absorbed, right, into the 65–70% range. So what is the point of all this? And you'll probably just be angry about it, but it's to show that these two lines kind of fit together, meaning that the idea that something is absorbed more will give you more photosynthesis. Something being absorbed less will give you less photosynthesis. Something being absorbed more gives you more photosynthesis. And that's what they're trying to show you. They're trying to show you that the absorption spectrum fits, or has almost like, you could say, like a correlation with chlorophyll's ability to photosynthesize. So if you want a plant to photosynthesize better, you want to look for what types of light or what wavelengths of light does it absorb most. Does that sound okay?
So like how similar the two lines are, or like what basically the plant is absorbing the most and that it's most effective for the plant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. If it absorbs that type of light, it's probably going to be better for it in terms of photosynthesizing, right?
No, it says you absorbing as in using it in photosynthesis.
That's the assumption we make, but if we just strictly say it absorbs this much, it's two separate things, right? Absorbance just means it brings it in and does not reflect it.
Oh, okay.
Then the action part of it is what it does with it, which is
Also, it's like how green leaf looks green. It's absorbing violet, blue, and orange, red.
Right, in a sense. And like, what is it? What is it doing with the violet, blue, and the orange, red? It's using it for photosynthesis.
But then, can you just like correlation and reasoning to just assume this happens?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I guess so. I think the difference is like what we have known in just like, I guess, like how do you call it? Just like common sense is like this part, right? Common sense is this section. You know that things are green because they reflect green light. You know that. But what we're adding is like, it reflects green light, therefore that energy can't be used for photosynthesis. That's what this point in the graph proves.
Okay.
Right? The opposite and then what these two peaks are showing is just the opposite. The opposite is that it doesn't reflect blue and violet. It doesn't reflect red. What is it doing with that? Oh, we see high levels of photosynthesis when those kinds of light are shone on it. So we must assume that it absorbs it in order to do photosynthesis.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So I believe that is, oh, there it is. That's what I was looking for. That's basically it. So if you look on either side of the visible light spectrum, you're going to see light that's not usable because either it is too high energy and could damage cells and damage DNA, or if you go beyond red, then the light is too weak. There's not enough energy that's worth even using in by chlorophyll.
Wait, Mr. Neelan,
Mm-hmm.
we can't visibly see UV light, right?
You can't see anything that's outside of that little slice that's called visible light.
But then why when we like a UV light torch or some like crime scene CSI where they shine the UV light, we can see like a purplish glow.
Yeah.
So bring me the UV light.
That's
Yeah.
black.
Why is there the glow? Like not like other lights.
It's not just light.
Shouldn't it be
Plus
just like
it's moving.
nothing and then you just whoa
It's
fingerprint?
black. That's
Someone-
UV light. It's called
There's a-
black.
Yeah, I was gonna say, does a physics person want to jump in on this?
Jansen. Oh wait, he dropped physics. Is Jansen here?
Ain't nobody got time for physics.
Oh, Jansen Chong.
Jensen Chang.
Chang, stop watching 9gag.
Johnson Chang.
Texting me memes this whole time.
Come on, Johnson. Do you even physics? Because I don't.
Johnson Chang
Okay.
Chang Shuang.
Not even-
Yeah, Jensen. Let's just talk about him this whole time, so he knows.
yeah.
He knows. We know that he's not here.
He needs a haircut.
I
Yes.
don't actually. That's a good question. I'm trying to think of whether is it actually the lamp that glows, or is it the other stuff that glows when you in those.
Is it the marking of the thing?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm not. I'm basically making that up. I don't really know the answer to that question. That is a good question, but I feel like that could also just be TV.
So it says
But
that
then in real
UV
life though.
Yeah, like if we're in like an escape room, like remember?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's not real.
it's-
That's not real UV. Otherwise,
Yeah,
that'd be very.
There
unknown.
is. It is. It's like
It's
No,
not.
that's just fluorescent light with a cool color. Sorry, Aditi has an Google, right? Something.
Yeah, it says that UV light that's like artificially made, not by the sun. It's produced with mercury vapor and deuterium lamps. And the trouble is that the lamps also produce a certain visible light content. So that's why you can like see UV light, but it's not actually UV light. It's just that
I
they
think
also produce visible light.
my life has been a lie.
Search black light on Google. It's that thing. Okay.
There you go. So it's mixed with some other stuff that also gives off some visible light. So it is UV, but it's mixed with some visible light.
That actually makes me want to buy a lava lamp for some reason.
And think about how photosynthesis rules the world. Let's finish with this, guys. I was alluding to this, but just the fact that different plants, we know that there's plants that have different colors, right? So what we have been saying about this absorption and action spectra is specific to quite like a green plant where most of its pigment is chlorophyll. Now there are different types of pigments that would give different colors, meaning they absorb like sort of a different range, let's say, of light. So if you think about it, like a plant that has like a red leaf, it would absorb and reflect different wavelengths, right? So it would be more reflecting of red, but then that means it would reflect, or it would absorb other wavelengths of light, but that means it's probably not chlorophyll that plant has as its major like absorber, right? Its major pigment to absorb light. So there are a lot of different types of pigments, and even chlorophyll. There's no plant where like it's just chlorophyll. Usually it's a mixture of a lot of different a lot of different pigments, so that you can sort of maximize your ability to absorb. So there are something called accessory pigments, right? So you can take advantage of also the green wavelength. So there's some other pigments that will be able to absorb green, right? And you can see that in plants that, for example, live underwater, right? So if your access to light is quite limited, you're going to want to be able to absorb as much as possible. So even green light, you're not going to reflect that as actively, because you want to keep as much as you can. And just an interesting point of why leaves change color in the fall is that's just showing through the like other pigments that leaf may have. So typically the chlorophyll is like front and center, it's the main player. But then in the winter, chlorophyll starts to break down, and then you're just, because chlorophyll is broken apart, the browner pigments, or the reddish orange pigments, they are now becoming like more apparent on the leaf. They've always been there, but the chlorophyll was kind of the more popular one. Boom. Yes, indeed. Okay, I believe, sorry, that is it. So usually we would be doing a cool practical now to like take pigment out of a leaf and then to separate it. And I think Mr. Oscar has like yelled at you about doing an experiment, and you said you hadn't done it, and he said he didn't believe you, but he was wrong and you guys were right, because we haven't done it yet. It's this thing called TLC, thin layer chromatography. So again, we'll save it for whenever we go back and we have like 3 weeks where we just do nothing but practical.
When we go back, I experiment.
Experiments all day long. But next lesson I'll show you how we can do it. You can simulate it online at least, just to get the idea of what it is. So that's it for today. Okay, part 1 of photosynthesis SL level. Does anyone want to ask any questions or any issues to clarify?
Mr. Ninon?
Yeah.
If UV light is harmful, right? Then how does it reflect?
Speak up, son. I can't hear you.
Hello?
Yeah. Okay, go.
If UV light is harmful, then the leaf just reflected. Like how?
Wait. UV light is harmful because it can cause.
But there's some UV light through the cloud, right? So if it's harmful, why didn't it all die?
Who?
But then, I mean, then you could also say, why doesn't everybody have skin cancer?
They have
So why? Is it just there's not enough?
Yeah, it's not like, because UV like strength can vary too, right? And like how much comes in contact. Like you can go and like suntan and not be guaranteed of getting skin cancer at that moment, right? Like even mutations are it's still just a risk, not necessarily a guarantee. But if you shine directly UV light for constant period of time, you're definitely increasing
the Wi-Fi.
The chances of causing a mutation, the risk of damage increases with that. I'm going to stop the recording just so